Hey there, everyone. So this week, Israel's Supreme Court held a hearing that most people outside of Israel didn't even hear about. And if they heard about it, they probably just heard about a screaming match that happened between some Israeli lawmakers who were there and some of the lawyers. But it's actually a very important legal fight, and it's happening in the country right now. And it goes to the heart of the question that Israel has been avoiding dealing with for 70 plus years. Here's what happened. Back in October 2024, the Knesset passed two laws banning UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, the UN agency that runs schools, clinics, and services for Palestinian refugees from operating on Israeli soil. And these laws also demanded that no Israeli official can have any contact with UNRWA. And there's a legal advocacy group called Adalah, then petitioned the Israeli High Court, the Supreme Court, to strike down those laws. Okay? That's what happened. So this week, the justices heard the case. And from what is being reported, it did not go well for Adalah. Okay, the panel signaled that it's likely to reject the petition and uphold the ban. Let's just take a look at a little bit of this news item here. Let me just make it bigger on the screen for you. Here we go. So this is the High Court signals it will likely reject petition against laws banning UNRWA activities. The High Court of Justice recommends that petitioners retract a petition filed against legislation barring UNRWA, the UN Relief Agency for Palestinians, from working in Israel and restricting its operations in the West Bank and Gaza, indicating that it will likely reject them. The recommendation comes at the end of a hearing in which the justices expressed skepticism that the rights of Palestinians have been adversely affected by the cessation of UNRWA's activities, as claimed by the Adalah legal aid organization that filed the petition, noting that the Palestinian Authority and other organizations are still providing for the needs of those formerly aided by UNRWA. Okay, and then it talks about this whole shooting match that took place. And then here we have a little bit more of the background. In October 2024, the Knesset passed these two laws with massive majorities banning UNRWA's operations in sovereign Israel, East Jerusalem, and banning state agencies from having any cooperation with them. And then the International Court of Justice issued a non-binding advisory opinion, because everything the International Court of Justice does is non-binding because it's not a real court. But they asserted that Israel was legally obligated to allow UNRWA's operations. And then we have this. So then we have this case now. Okay, that's where we are with this. Now, again, if you don't follow this closely, you don't really know. Your instinct might be, wait, isn't UNRWA a humanitarian aid agency? Why is Israel banning a humanitarian aid agency? Isn't that going to hurt Palestinian civilians? So I want to explain why the answer is no, and why getting rid of UNRWA isn't cruelty at all. It's actually a very important step to moving forward if there's ever going to be a future of any kind of peaceful resolution and coexistence between Israel and the Arab residents of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, what's known as the Palestinians. If we're ever going to have peace, getting rid of UNRWA is actually critical. So we're going to get into that. But before we get into that, I want to tell you about a very exciting event that we have coming up. Okay, we're going to be talking about it in our videos for the next little while. And this event is going to take place. Oops, sorry about that. Let me remove that from the stage. And here we go. We're having a webinar. And those of you who attended our last webinar about Iran, it was amazing. There were thousands of people, literally thousands of people who registered for that webinar. And it was an incredible webinar. Many of the clips from it have been posted ever since then to the Israel 365 news channel. I think all the clips have been posted at this point. But you don't want to miss this webinar. This is taking place on Sunday, August 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 9 p.m. in Israel, or you could watch it anytime you want. If you, just like all of our webinars, if you register for this webinar, even if you can't make it to attend it live, you will automatically receive an email with the full, with a link to watch the full webinar immediately upon its completion, meaning you sign up for the webinar and you'll be able to watch it on your own time, or you could attend it live. Now, if you attend it live, you also get to, to see it live, but you're also, there's a chat and you'll be able to interact and ask questions. So there are some advantages certainly to attending live, but you can sign up for this webinar, Mamdani's New York City, a warning to America. And we have an unbelievable lineup. At this webinar. We're going to be joined by former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. We are going to be joined by Shabbos Kestenbaum. Many of you probably know who he is, a young man who has become a very important voice. He's a commentator and writer for PragerU. Robert Spencer, who is a very prolific writer on the whole topic of Islam. And he actually wrote a book about Mamdani during the election campaign. If you haven't heard of Robert Spencer and Jihad Watch, you should definitely be following them. And Rabbi Daniel Schombach, my good friend, who he's also on YouTube, and he's at rabbiforamerica.com and has been leading the fight of the anti-Mamdani activism that's been going on in New York City. It's an incredible lineup. You don't want to miss this webinar, Mamdani's New York City, A Warning to America. That is Sunday, August 16th, 2 p.m. And you can sign up by the link in the description of this video, or you can go to Israel365.com/Mamdani, or you can click the QR code on your screen. If you click that QR code, go through there, you'll be able to register for the webinar. But you have to register if you want to watch the full webinar, either live or in your inbox afterwards. Okay, so that is that. Let's remove this now from the stage and get back to our subject at hand. Okay. First, some basic background about UNRWA. Most people don't know about this. UNRWA is not the UN's refugee agency. There's a separate body for that, the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, that handles every refugee crisis on earth except one. In 1949, after Israel's War of Independence, the Arab states insisted on creating a completely separate agency just for Palestinian refugees, and they insisted it have the letters UN in its name. Why? Because they wanted the world to see this as the international community's problem, the UN's problem, not the consequence of a war that 5 Arab armies started when they invaded the day that Israel declared independence. Now, understand that context. Had 5 Arab armies invaded the brand new state of Israel the day that it declared independence, had they not started that war and accepted the UN partition plan, there would be 0 refugees. No one was expelled from their homes, except in the context of a war where a lot of people get displaced. And notably, in this situation, most of the Arabs that fled because the Arab leaders told them to. I've talked about this before. This is a documented historical fact. Now, that's when UNRWA was founded. Compare that to what happened, let's say, in Korea around the same time. Millions of Koreans were displaced by the Korean War. Millions. The UN set up an agency called UNRWA to handle it. Within about 3 years, the UNRWA had resettled over 3 million Korean refugees into new lives, and then it shut down. It shut itself down because that's what a refugee agency is supposed to do, solve the problem and close. UNRWA has been open for over 75 years, and it has never resettled a single person, not one. Because unlike every other refugee agency on the planet, UNRWA doesn't just serve refugees, it passes refugee status down through the generations. If your great-grandfather fled in 1948, you are still officially classified as a refugee today, even if you were born, raised, and even if you hold citizenship somewhere else entirely, which is a complete contradiction in terms. The very definition of being a refugee is that you are kind of like homeless. If you've been granted citizenship and have been living for multiple generations in another country where you are a citizen, you're not a refugee. It's kind of like, by definition, you're living somewhere where you have citizenship, you're not a refugee. Anyway, that's not because, look, this isn't how refugee status works anywhere in the world, but there's a special exemption that in this case, with the Palestinians only, this one population, you can be a refugee, and you can be a refugee in perpetuity for generation after generation, and the number can never shrink, it can only grow. That is why the original count of people displaced in 1948, which was somewhere around 700,000, and they were displaced for a whole variety of reasons. Today, it's become nearly 6 million official refugees on UNRWA's rolls. Most of them have never lived anywhere near Israel. A huge share of them are fully functioning citizens of the country of Jordan, And Jordan, of course, was part of the original Palestine mandate. So there's people in Jordan who are Palestinians, and they are considered refugees. Many of the rest of them already live under Palestinian self-rule in various parts of Judea and Samaria, known as the West Bank, in their own places. So they're not really refugees. Why would they be called refugees if they're in the land that they're from, that they live in? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to. But the category refugee has been stretched so far in the case of these Palestinian Arabs that it has basically lost all meaning. Now, in other words, the only real purpose of this is to keep this refugee situation alive and the demand for return, which in this case means the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish state. Now, here's where it stops being this academic point about refugee definitions and becomes much more serious. UNRWA doesn't just hand out refugee cards. It runs the school system for hundreds of thousands of Palestinian children in Gaza, in the West Bank. That's Judea and Samaria. That's the term they use for it. So I'm using it, but it's an incorrect term. I digress. UNRWA runs the school system for all of them. In Jordan, in Lebanon, in Syria, they're running schools all over the region for Palestinian refugees. And for decades, watchdog groups have documented that UNRWA classrooms have taught a curriculum soaked in anti-Semitic, anti-Israel incitement, maps of the Middle East with Israel erased, textbooks that glorify terrorist martyrs, lessons that frame the conflict not as a dispute over land, but as a religious obligation to erase the Jewish state entirely. This is UN-funded schools. Okay, generations of children who grew up in this educational system built around the idea that their identity is defined by this tragedy, and that the way to resolve it is to erase Israel, to fight back, to go back home to Israel. I mean, to take Israel off the map. This is UNRWA schools. Now, this all matters because after October 7th, we got a very, shall we say, brutal answer to what happens when you have an education system like that for generations. UN Watch, a very respected monitoring organization, uncovered a Telegram group that was used by roughly 3,000 UNRWA teachers and staff in Gaza. In the hours and days after the October 7th massacre, some of the administrators of that group were posting celebrations, footage of the attacks, shared with captions like "resistance on the roof of settlers' houses," and posts that were praising the murder of civilians as a fulfillment of religious duty. This wasn't a couple of bad actors. It was people entrusted. This is the UNRWA chat group. These are people entrusted by the UN to educate children who were cheering on the massacre. And then it turned out that about a dozen UNRWA employees were themselves directly implicated in carrying out the October 7th attack. Several countries then suspended their funding for UNRWA. UNRWA's own leadership response wasn't to launch a serious, transparent investigation. Instead, they attacked UN Watch. Now, UNRWA, this institution, is being asked, or Israel is being asked by the International Court of Justice to keep allowing this organization, UNRWA, to operate freely inside its borders. And of course, Israel has said no. And this week, Israel's Supreme Court is saying that it agrees. Now, that's not a small thing. Israel's Supreme Court tends to be the most left-wing branch of our government by far. And it tends to be very hard on Israel when it comes to issues like this, but they seem to be agreeing. Now, there's a piece of this that a lot of people don't really get. You think, well, if you remove UNRWA, then aren't there all these humanitarian needs that are no longer being met, even if they've got bad actors? Well, this is a bit misunderstood. People assume that the choice is UNRWA or nothing. Like there's no more aid, there's going to be more suffering, which is complete nonsense. UNRWA does not provide the food or the medicine or the fuel that goes into Gaza. Other UN agencies, other international NGOs, and other governments are fully capable of delivering humanitarian relief, and in plenty of cases they already do in parallel with UNRWA. What UNRWA uniquely provides is not aid capacity. It's the 75-year-old bureaucratic architecture that perpetuates refugee status. And as we've just seen in Gaza specifically, it also functioned as a payroll and support structure for Hamas activists. Now think about it from Hamas's side for a second. Hamas runs Gaza. Okay, and this is really where you see a piece of the UNRWA grift that doesn't really come out when you just hear the reports. Okay, Hamas runs Gaza. It has to feed people. It has to run clinics. It has to pay teachers, right? Because Hamas wasn't only a vicious genocidal terrorist organization, it was also ostensibly the government of Gaza. It has to keep society functioning. And in order to do it, it would have to divert some of its Hamas resources to pay teachers and to run clinics and do all that stuff. But now they don't have to. You see, so long as UNRWA exists, there's international money coming in, a huge amount of money coming in, and it's running the health clinics and it's paying the teachers and it's doing a whole bunch of humanitarian things, which are just basically normal infrastructure and governance, providing normal services that otherwise a government would have to provide. And Hamas doesn't have to worry about those things anymore. So functionally, UNRWA is the mechanism of the United Nations, of all these countries, subsidizing Hamas's ability to use its resources and its manpower and pour it into building tunnels and building rockets and terrorism. Dr. Einat Wilf, who has studied this for years, she wrote a great book about it called The War of Return. You should see it. You should find that book. You should read it. It's a great book about this issue. Dr. Einat Wilf put it simply. She said, UNRWA frees Hamas from the burdens of governing so it can focus on war. Take UNRWA out of the picture and someone else has to take over all those responsibilities on other terms. Hamas would have to spend its own resources, for example, feeding and educating people instead of just building terrorist infrastructure. Now, even Switzerland's own foreign minister, Ignazio Cassis, not exactly a hardline pro-Israel voice here, he put it about as bluntly as any diplomat ever could. He said that UNRWA has become part of the problem, that by supporting it, the international community is supplying, in his words, the ammunition to continue the conflict. Right? He called it a perverse logic, and he's right. Every dollar that goes to keeping 6 million people frozen in perpetual inherited refugee status is a dollar that isn't going toward the thing that would actually help the Palestinians, building an economy, an education system, civil society aimed at a future, not backward at a war that ended in 1949. See, UNRWA is the perpetuation of the issue, okay, of the claim, meaning the whole claim that they're all refugees. What underlies that claim is the illegitimacy of Israel. That's what UNRWA really is. So when people frame this this story, if you see it in the headlines at all, as Israel punishing Palestinian civilians by banning UNRWA, no. The people being failed by UNRWA are the Palestinian civilians themselves. 75 years of an agency that was never designed to solve their situation, whose own definition of refugee traps them and their grandchildren in perpetuity in the same status, whose schools taught generations to see their future only through the lens of grievance, as a war, as a war for return, rather than building a life next door to Israel. Now, this is, let me interject something. I've said this before, and it's really worth thinking about. Could you just imagine how good the lives of these people would be if they would simply say, we're done trying to kill Jews, we're done trying to destroy Israel, we just want to work and raise our families. If they simply did that, they live in a place in one of the fastest growing, most prosperous economies in the world, with all kinds of innovation and all kinds of possibility. They could live they could live off of that economy, off the work that would be provided, And they would be the most prosperous, they'd be the happiest Arabs in the Middle East. But they don't. And UNRWA with its education system, with its message, with its very existence, with its reminder every day to them of their grievance and their status as refugees, perpetuates the entire problem forever. Because the day the refugee problem is resolved is the day UNRWA has no reason to exist anymore, and this whole system goes away. And it's also, there's tons of money pouring through there, or has been in past years. So Israel banning UNRWA from its territory isn't Israel walking away from the welfare of the Palestinian people. It's Israel saying we're done treating the group that keeps the conflict alive in perpetuity. We're done pretending that they're helping us solve it. Let humanitarian aid come from agencies without a stake in perpetuating the refugee status forever. Let education come from a curriculum that doesn't teach their children that their birthright is war against Israel, and that's their reason for being. Let the world finally send the same message to the Palestinians that it sent to every other refugee population in modern history. The Germans displaced after World War II, the Hindus and Muslims displaced by partition, the Greeks and the Turks, the Poles, all of them. And I mentioned the South Koreans. Refugee status is a temporary condition on the way to a resettled life. And in this situation, you don't have to go anywhere. Just educate them differently. Let's start employing them. You don't have to be trying to destroy Israel and perpetuating this whole mindset. UNRWA is at the root of the problem. Look, that's what this week's court hearing was really about. Okay, it's not, there is a legal question here, but the real question is whether Israel will stop participating in a grift system that is specifically engineered to keep the conflict unresolved. Okay, that's what it's about. And based on how the justices responded, and I'm thankful because the justices, you never know with them, they're very left-wing, but based on how they responded, it sounds like the answer is finally moving in the right direction. So that's what this is about. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. I hope you found it interesting. Please like, share, subscribe, do all those great things, and make sure you sign up for the webinar about Zoran Mamdani and what he represents and the threat to America from this whole phenomenon of what's going on in New York. You don't want to miss it. That's Sunday, August 16th. I think, did I say August? Yeah, Sunday, August 16th, coming up very soon at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure that you sign up for the webinar. You don't want to miss it. So go to the link in the description of this video or click on the QR code and make sure that you that you're all signed up. All right, God bless.